This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Good leaders must make good decisions for good reasons. Valeria Teles interviews Craig B. Weldon, the author of Leadership, The Art of Inspiring People to Be Their Best. Craig's leadership journey began as an Eagle Scout at age 14. 30 years later, he was the youngest general in the United States Army. Combined with another 9 years as a member of the Senior Executive Service with the U.S. Marine Corps, he has led thousands of soldiers, sailors, Marines, and civilians, while serving 10 years in Europe and another 12 in the Pacific. In 2011, he was inducted into the Purdue University Tri-Service ROTC Hall of Fame. In March 2019, he published Leadership, The Art of Inspiring People to Be Their Best, winning 3 book awards and attaining #1 international bestseller status on Amazon. Craig is now a global Fortune 500 speaker and lives in Bluffton, South Carolina. Meet Craig at craigweldon.com. Here's the interview with Craig B. Weldon.
In your own words, who is Craig Weldon?
Well, I am a person who has had a tremendously successful and enjoyable life, and I reflect back on 69 years of successes and failures. And I learned from the failures, and I'm happy for the successes.
Yes, and this is one of the questions I often ask. What is success? What is success to you these days?
You know, I think it differs for every person. I've always been on a journey. I wrote about it in my book. When I first wrote my book, it turned out to be a memoir, story of my life, essentially. And my editor told me, look, if you want to write a book about leadership, you need to do some changes. And I said, why is that? He said, because nobody's going to read this book. He said, nobody knows who you are. You're not famous and you're not infamous. If you were Michelle Obama, or you were Amoroso, you would be famous, or you would be infamous, and people would buy your book because of who you are. But because nobody knows who you are, you need to write something. You need a different catch. And I said, well, that's great advice. What do you suggest? And he said, go into your memoir, find all those leadership nuggets that you mentioned, and there are many of them there, pull them out, make them chapter titles, and then fold these stories, these wonderful stories that you have of the experiences you've had in your life, fold them underneath to support each of the chapters. So that's what I did. I, figuratively speaking, took a highlighter, went through the book, found all the leadership nuggets, character, trust, leaving a legacy, all those different things that I wanted to talk about. And I made them the chapter titles, and then I folded these stories underneath. And it worked. It worked because the book has won 3 national book awards. It's a #1 bestseller in 5 countries. It's been downloaded thousands of times all over the world. And I use it often when I speak in front of groups. They very, very frequently will purchase a copy of the book for everybody in attendance. So What is success? Success to me is leaving a legacy that I gave back to the generations that follow me, the things that I've learned, both good and bad, over the past 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I'll be exploring that, what your legacy has given us.
as wisdom. I usually refer to that word. So my next follow-up question is, or my next warm-up question is, what do you want from life at this time?
I want people to remember that I left something good behind. And oftentimes that means just giving of yourself. So I'm not really in the business of being a professional speaker to make a lot of money. I am in the business of being a professional speaker in order to give back to other generations things that they can learn from me. Because I think that one of the saddest things would be for somebody to live a very, very fruitful and good life, and I think I have, and not be able to share that with others in ways that will help them.
We talked about briefly off record, 2020 has been a time of change and challenges. What insights have you gained from the events in 2020?
Well, one of the things that I learned from 2020 was at least in the United States, the tremendous divide that we certainly have now. It's something that I didn't realize was as significant prior to 2020 than it actually is. And it's really a sad commentary, I think, because great leaders pull teams together, and their teams often have different views, as this country has different views. And I'm hopeful that in the future that we'll be able to do a better job of doing that. But 2020, not just with the coronavirus, but with the politics of the day, it was a year that I'm glad is in our rearview mirror now.
God, don't get me started with that. Politics.
I'm a speaker on 2 luxury cruise lines, and one of the things they told me when I got on the cruise line was to stay away from politics and religion. And so true. I try to do that. And I'm very practiced at that, because after spending 40 years in the military, we are apolitical by design, because you don't serve an individual, you serve the nation and the Constitution. So when I got on my first cruise about a little over a year ago, and I spoke, I knew that people would be coming after me asking about the politics of the United States. And there were people from all over the world on this cruise. And I told them, I'll talk about policy, but not personalities.
What is your own definition for leadership?
Well, let me tell a quick story. I once worked for a 3-star general, an Army general, and I was his deputy. I was a 2-star general at the time. And he was a consummate gentleman, never raised his voice in anger, was very, very bright, very capable, very, very organized. And a colonel came up to me one time and he said, General so-and-so is the toughest guy I have ever worked for. And I looked at him and said, oh, really? Why is that? And he said, because I never wanted to disappoint him. And boy, that told me volumes about how that colonel felt about his commander, the 3-star general. And quite frankly, everybody else in the organization felt the same way. Every one of us wanted to wake up every morning and come to work to do the very best we could and give 110%, not just for the organization, but for our boss, because he inspired us. And he inspired us in so many ways. But he was an exceptional leader because he led by example. He trusted his subordinates. He treated us with the respect and dignity, no matter what the grade was, that all of us deserved. He never forgot that at one time he was a junior officer doing the sorts of things that many of the tens of thousands of soldiers that he led are currently doing for him. And he was an absolute inspiration.
That really makes me think about the highest spiritual teachings, that we are all connected and we treat others the way we treat ourselves. So it's interesting how the way you speak of leadership, according to this story, it's very similar to that. It kind of relates to that teaching.
No, it absolutely is. Treat others as you would expect to be treated, and you'll find that they'll do unbelievable things for you. Let me tell another quick story, if I may.
Yeah.
I was an armor officer in the Army, a tanker, a cavalryman, and I trained for the first 20 years of my career on how to fight wars successfully against adversaries. And at the 20-year point, the Army turned to me and said, "We're going to make you a base commander." And a base commander is essentially like a town mayor. They're basically running the installation, the garrison, the fort, the post, whatever you want to call it, the base. And I said at the time, I don't know anything about base operations, and I don't care to learn. I'm a tanker. I've been spending the last 20 years learning how to fight America's wars. Well, I ended up being a base commander anyway, and it was absolutely the best thing that ever happened to me. And the reason is because I had now 3,000 employees. 95% of them were civilians, which was new because I had nothing but soldiers up to that point. Yeah. Half of them were women. Half of them were German because my base was in Germany. And we had 40 to 45,000 soldiers and family members that we were responsible for taking care of. And I mean, everything that you would expect in a small town, from paying the electricity bill to building new buildings, to running the child care center, to holding town halls, to doing labor relations conversations with the workforce. And I went into that job knowing almost nothing about running a base. I had been a customer my entire life because I'd lived on bases before, but I had never run a base. And I told my workforce at the time, look, I don't know very much about running a base. You are the experts. And so I'm going to put my trust in you until you demonstrate that you're not worthy of that trust. Right. And I want you to tell me what I can do to help make you successful. Point me towards the things that I can add value to. And they did, and it was an absolute wonderful experience for me. I learned more about the Army than I ever would have had I stayed in the traditional warfighting lane that I had been in for the last 20 years. And I also learned more about myself because it took a very different kind of leader to lead that kind of a workforce than it did 1,000 soldiers.
What are some of the greatest misconceptions about leadership from your perspective?
I think that some people think that the harder you are, the firmer you are, the better you are. Right. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, because if you go back to the story I just told about the 3-star general, he inspired us. He didn't have to do very much except point in a direction, and I say, that's the direction I want this ship to go, to use a Navy metaphor. And the rest of us understood exactly what he needed because he was clear, he was concise, and he told us what the expectations were. And like I said, all of us wanted to get up and make sure that not only did we succeed, but the organization and he would succeed. His success was our success. And that's the kind of effective leader I think that many organizations hope for, but don't always have. True. One other story, if I may, to illustrate this point. Yeah. I think character is probably the most important leadership trait there is. And that's the reason it's chapter 1 in my book. The title of the chapter is Character, Basic Building Block for Leadership, or Leadership's Basic Building Block. I was sent by the Marine Corps. I worked for the Marine Corps for 9 years as a senior executive, and I was sent to the Marine Corps by the Marine Corps to a course called Leadership at the Peak. It was about a 4.5-day course, and it was all about self-awareness. And there were only 12 students in the course. All of them were C-suite executives, CEOs, COOs, CIOs, and the like, except for me. I was the only federal employee in the entire course. So the other 11 students were in their 40s and their 50s, were either leading companies or very, very senior in companies. And in the run-up to that course, they had us doing all kinds of self-awareness tests and evaluations. One of them was a 360-degree evaluation where we were to ask our subordinates, our coworkers, and our boss to assess us anonymously and tell us in the survey exactly what they thought of us. So when we got there on the very first day, they turned to a board on the wall and they said, you'll see up there a graph posted showing the results of these surveys that you did as students and that your contemporaries, your coworkers, and your boss did. And there were no names on them at the time. But as we all looked at that, what I saw were probably 8 or 9 of the charts that I was looking at had a great disparity between the way the student viewed themselves and the way the rest of their organization viewed themselves, and not in a good way.
Wow.
In almost every case, these individual students thought more of themselves than their contemporaries and their subordinates thought of them. And so it was a wake-up call for them. And it was the next 3.5 to 4 days was all about peeling that onion back, figuring out, why do we have this gap between the way others view you and the way you view you? When you look in the mirror, you need to make sure that you see yourself in the same mold that others see you if you're going to be an effective leader. Because if you don't, you're an emperor with no clothes on.
That is so true. And that brings me to the topic of self-knowledge, which is a huge one, getting to know who you are. What are some of the strategies or exercise or practices that you adopted to get to know who you are?
So when I was a company commander, and for your listening audience, a company is about anywhere from, let's say, 60 to 150 soldiers. I didn't really need to spend a lot of time with these soldiers, convincing them of how I thought, what I thought was important, the direction we need to go, because I was with them every single day. But the more senior you become in an organization, whether it's in the military or in the corporate world, it doesn't matter. The more you need to reflect on, how am I going to communicate the direction I want this organization to go? And so when I became a battalion commander, I had 1,000 soldiers. Wow. And those 1,000 soldiers would rotate in and out of the organization every 2 to 3 years. So I would get new soldiers every single month. And at that point in time in the military, we write down what we call our philosophy of command. And the philosophy of command is kind of like a corporate vision statement and a values statement. It's sort of the same thing. Anybody that reads my book will find that philosophy of command, which I wrote in 1989 in my book. It's Appendix A. And it basically lays out for the organization, here's the direction I want you to go. And here are those things that I view as very, very important, and some things that are negotiable. Let me read the first and a couple of sentences on the first page. It says, as I joined the 2nd Battalion, 10th Cavalry, I owe it to each of you to describe in some detail my philosophy of command. These basic beliefs and values have developed and grown throughout my 16 years in the Army. If you understand the thrust of this memo, you will understand me. And then it goes on, and I lay it out. Now, when I wrote that down in 1989, this is before the days of computers and word processing and all that. It was on a legal pad. And I then typed it up, and I sent it out to probably 12 or 15 different people that knew me very, very well. And I said, this is how I think that I think. I would ask for you to be very candid and provide me feedback. Am I kidding myself, or is this a true reflection of me? And I got some good feedback from all those people that I trusted. And so I did a little bit of editing, but at the end of the day, when I got that thing done, I handed it out to all the leaders in my organization on the very first day, and I had a meeting with them. I said, let me tell you a little bit about me. And let me tell you about the direction I want this organization to go, what I think is important, what's non-negotiable, and let me even tell you about my strengths and weaknesses. And I did that on the very first day. And then every single month when we had newcomers coming into the organization, I would assemble the newcomers, and I would go through the standards pitch again, doing essentially the same thing. And then I would hand out my philosophy of command to each of those new people. Everybody knew from the very beginning exactly who I was and the direction I wanted the organization to go. And I guess I would ask your listeners to ask themselves, have you ever worked for somebody that comes into the organization, and 2 or 3 months later you're still trying to figure them out, what they think is important and what isn't? That's frustrating. And so I think an effective leader does that very, very early on to make sure everybody is very, very clear on where we're headed.
Yes, I love this. It's almost as an exercise, a practice for all of us, not just in corporate and companies, but homes, for families to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
I have another appendix in my book. The second appendix is called Weldon on Weldon. And that's a briefing that I used to give to people that said, let me tell you who I am and how I think. And let me also tell you what my strengths and what my weaknesses are. And I felt comfortable enough in my own skin to be able to say that early on. Because people have peculiarities. Let me tell another quick story, if I may. I once worked for a boss. He was a general officer, and he was brand new. And the very first time he had a meeting of his staff, let's say it was on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock, he came into the conference room. He sat at the end of the table, and there was a clock on the wall at the other end. One of those big white standard government clocks. And he was there at about 8:55, and people started coming in and sitting down. There were designated places for each of the staff to sit. And he didn't say anything. And then at 9 o'clock on the dot, and I mean when the second hand hit the 9 o'clock, he turned to his aide, who was a captain, and he said, close the door and lock it. Now, there were two people missing from the staff. And they came, but they came a couple of minutes after 9. They were late. And when they found that the door was locked, they knocked on the door. And the general turned to his aide and said, don't open the door. Wow. Now, he had a thing about timeliness, and I'm not criticizing that. I'm really not, because I think people should have some discipline to be wherever they need to be on time. But I asked myself, and I ask your listeners, was that the best way on the very first week that he was coming into the command to essentially humiliate two people that were late, who could have been late for a good reason? We don't know what the reason is for them to show up late. Maybe another way of doing that would be that in his first staff meeting, he says something about timeliness and discipline. And he says, I think it's very, very important that if you're going to be supposed to be somewhere at 9 o'clock, that you be there at 9 o'clock, and then to just leave it at that. But I have to tell you, the two colonels that didn't show up in time to get inside the room, for many, many weeks after that, they were feeling pretty low, as you can imagine, because that was their first experience with the new boss, and it was not a good one.
Oh, wow. And that's a message for me. I think, a very good one. And I love what you said, and that's true, because the understanding leads to conversation, that leads to compassion, that leads to love, and union, not separation. Yeah, understanding is really important, knowing why we act the way we do the things we do. What do you think is the purpose of the human experience?
Well, I guess we could get a little philosophical here. I think the human experience is that we all support each other and that we all support this world that we live in. That's kind of a noble thought perhaps, and perhaps it's a bit naive because there are evil people in the world just as there are very, very good people in the world. And I think leaders are here to help us distinguish between the two. What I don't think personally that we're taking a very good care of our planet, and that if we don't take good care of our planet, our successors on this planet are going to regret it. And I don't think we take as good care of each other as we should. And that's why now that I have the means and the time to be able to give back, I spend a lot of my time doing exactly that, not just trying to help people be better people, but help those who can't help themselves.
You say that leadership is complicated. Why is that?
It's complicated because, there is no definitive answer I don't think there's a definitive answer for truly effective leadership. People often ask the question, is leadership something that is learned or is it something that comes naturally? Right. Is it, I think it's a little bit of both. I think there are people who are born to be good leaders because their character is solid, but it can be improved. And so if you look for example, the way the military recruits officers who are the leaders in the military, they look for people who have some natural talent, but they spend an awful lot of energy trying to refine that talent and improve that talent to make them the best they possibly can be. When I was a senior executive for the Marine Corps and when I was a general officer for the Army, both those services sent me to a leadership course every single year. And the one that I mentioned in Colorado, Leadership at the Peak, where they had the self-awareness and the other CEO, that's just one of many, many that I went to. Now, I'm in my 40s, 50s, and 60s when I'm going to these courses, and I will tell you that learning never ends.
True.
You can constantly be learning. I'm learning something today just talking to you. I did a podcast last night with a guy who's 27 years old. He's younger than my kids are, and I learned an awful lot from him. Right. Learning never stops. And I think if you want to be the most effective leader, you never assume that you know it all. You are constantly learning to do better.
What is the meaning of freedom to you? What is to be free?
Another philosophical question, perhaps, because I guess you could think of it in the sense of nation states that are more free than others are. Certainly, the United States allows freedom that North Korea does not. Those are two extremes, I think. But I'm not sure that everybody has the freedom that we would like them to have because they don't have the means to achieve that freedom. What do I mean by that? I would love to have been doing my entire life what I'm doing now, writing a book about leadership and then going on the speaking circuit. But I didn't have the freedom to do that when I was 20 years old. One, because I didn't have the experience of being a leader. I needed the time to be able to develop those leadership skills. And two, because I didn't have the means to support myself, to support a family, and to do those kinds of things. So I now have the freedom to do that because I've got, retirement income from two careers, one with the Army, one with the Marine Corps. And, I'm over 65, so I can even draw Social Security now. So now I can kind of do what I want, and I now have the freedom to be able to do it and not worry about it. But I've got two children. They're both out of college. They have families of their own. The only obligation I have is to my wife and to society at large. And so I try to give as much to society now that I possibly can because I know the clock is ticking.
We're almost at the end, and I do have so many questions here for you that I won't be able to ask.
We should do this a second time because I've got thousands of stories.
Oh, I'd love to hear them, and I love your wisdom.
Touch your audience.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure. I would love that too. So let me select some of the questions. So your book, Leadership, The Art of Inspiring People to Be Their Best. When it comes to being our best, is that being and doing our best the same, or do you somehow distinguish these two states?
I think it's the same church, perhaps a different pew in the same church. Yeah. But being first of all, I'm not sure that everybody can be their absolute best. You can almost always be better than you are. Right. And so one of the things the Army taught me decades ago was that after we do an operation or after we do a training event, we always did what we called an after-action review. What does that mean? AAR, after-action review. I talk about it in my book. Well, what it means is that we would then reflect on what did we just do? How well did we do it? What things did we do right? What things did we do wrong? And when we do this sort of thing again, how can we do it better than we did it this time? And we would always start those after-action reviews off by having the leader of the organization stand up at the beginning and saying, let me tell you what I did wrong. Wow. Now, why did we do it that way? It's so that everybody in the organization that's junior to the leader then would feel free to and see that here's a leader that's standing up and admitting the mistakes that he or she made in front of the organization. And that really gave everybody an opportunity to be able to do exactly the same thing. So, success is a journey. It's not a destination, I don't think. You can always climb the mountain a little bit higher and make yourself better. do things better, be better. And I think anybody who thinks that they've arrived at the final destination is probably missing something.
I love that too. I mean, I love pretty much everything you say because it resonates with the mind and the heart. Power, that's a word that a lot of us, especially women, we refrain from using. So let me ask you this question. What is power to you?
Wow. Let's substitute power for another word, which I'll use, influence.
Yeah.
If you are able to influence people or a situation, one could argue that you have power. Now, how do you influence people? You don't have to demonstrate through what one might characteristically call brute force, or metaphorically, for example, leaders who scream and yell and intimidate, and those are all traits, I think, that are counterproductive.
Right.
Again, back to the 3-star general who inspired the organization because of the way he was. He had all those basic character traits, which I think he had self-awareness to start with. He had humility. He had ambition, obviously. He had trust. He had understanding. He was a team player. He was ready to be led as well as lead. Those are all characteristics of effective leaders. He had power, but he had the power to influence us in ways that were positive rather than negative. And, I don't think we ever looked at him as having power. We looked at him as being inspirational. And so somebody who is inspirational, in fact, has power. Somebody who has the ability to lead people in ways that they are willing to go, they have power. I'm not a big fan of the word power either.
Right.
If what you're saying is, if the women in your audience don't like that word, well, guess what? I don't either. I do like the word influence. I do like the word inspiration.
Yeah.
In fact, I really like the word inspiration because it's a self-perpetuating. When you inspire something or somebody, you don't have to do much more because it'll get done all by itself.
So true. I guess it's because we have confused the word power with control, manipulation, control, force. Yeah. Might be that. Yeah, I love these words too. Influence, to inspire, and to empower.
That's exactly right. And trust.
Oh, yes.
There's a reason trust is the second chapter in my book.
Yes, I love that. Oh, I have so many questions and I can't ask today, but yes, let's meet again. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I thought we were going to talk about the chapter in my book. In fact, all your listeners could actually go read it if they wanted to. It's on my website, craigweldon.com. I have a sample chapter. It's called The Light at the End of the Tunnel.
Yes.
And I would encourage all your listeners to go read that chapter. And the next time we chat, perhaps we could talk about that.
That would be wonderful. I'll have the link on the podcast profile too. So before I ask you my final questions, I have 2 questions for you. Would you like to add anything or read a passage in your book, Craig?
Well, again, I think if people like the sample chapter on my website, they're going to love my book. And there are many, many testimonials and reviews of the book. As I said, it's won 3 national awards, book awards. It's a #1 bestseller in 5 countries. People are amazed that this military guy wrote a book which is really targeted not at the military, but for the rest of society. I wrote this book not for the military. I wrote it as somebody who had spent time in the military, but the idea was let me talk about leadership and life lessons. So it's not exclusively about leadership. It's about the lessons I learned in life. I tell the story of, in fact, that's chapter 18 of my divorce, my first divorce early in my life, and how devastating that was and how I overcame it. In the very next chapter, I talk about the suicide of my sister and what that meant to me and how that changed my life and changed my priorities. So, those are not associated with the military at all. And so I think your readers would really love the book, and I think they'd love to hear me on your show again.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that. My audience reflects my own beliefs and values. So, yes, and I love your presence, your wisdom in everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Valeria.
I do have two more questions for you. If you knew you would die soon, meaning losing the body, would you make any change in your life or do anything in a different way?
No. I think I'm now very, very comfortable and content that I'm on a journey which I have been striving to achieve much of my life. I didn't know until about 2.5 years ago that I would be doing what I'm doing today. Somebody said to me when I told them I was going to be retiring from military about 2.5, 3 years ago, they said, "What do you want to do next?" And I said, "I want to give back to the next generation whatever I've learned in the last 40 or 50 years." And they said, "Well, you need to write a book." And I laughed and I said, "Are you kidding me? I can't write a book. I've never written a book." It was intimidating to have somebody say that to me. And I guess part of the lesson coming out of that was that I could write a book, and I did write a book, and it's done very, very well. And the book really is a means to an end. The end is me communicating to other people, here's how I have learned, here are the things that I've learned in my life that I think might benefit you. Take what you want, leave what you don't, and pass on to others those things that you think are worthy. And so when I personalize a book and give it to somebody, that's what I say. This is what I've learned. Take what you want, leave what you don't, and pass on whatever you think is worthy. And there's lots of what I'll call nuggets in the book that you can pick up, put in your rucksack, and carry with you the rest of your life. And I think if I die tomorrow, I'll feel comfortable that I will have left a legacy worth leaving.
My last question to you. What are 3 things about life you know for sure as of this moment?
Life can be good, bad, or ugly, and often is for different people, and it can be better for some and worse for others. Yeah. But I think every single one of us has gone through difficult times in our life. I certainly have, both professionally and personally. And there, as the title of chapter 18, which is the sample chapter on my book, there is light at the end of the tunnel, oftentimes. And many times people can't see it. They go into a dark place and they think they're going to stay there. They think there's no way out. And I have had enough experiences in over 6 decades to know that when you get into a dark place, very frequently, through perseverance, through help from others, through hope, through faith, and time, you oftentimes come out the other end better off for it. And I've got, again, a number of stories, both personal and professional, where I thought, wow, this is the end. And it wasn't. It was the beginning of something new and different and wonderful.
Yeah, we do think a lot of times that is the end, but it's the other way around. Yeah, quite the opposite. Thank you so much, Greg, for your wisdom, your profound wisdom, your kindness, your generosity, your work, your presence. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. It's been a wonderful half hour or so, and I'd love to do this again.
Oh, great. Please tell us again about your website. Where can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
Yeah, that's really easy. If anybody goes to Google and just types my name in, Craig Weldon, my website pops right up because it's craigweldon.com. And I tell people there's a window into my soul on my website. Yeah. You can learn an awful lot about who I am, what I think is important, what I've done, what I'd like to do. I've got demo videos, I've got testimonials, I've got book reviews, I've got podcasts, I've got blog articles that I've written. There's a wealth of information on my website, and you can order the book from the website. My speaking career, I've got my schedule, people that I've spoken to, people I'm scheduled to speak to. All of that is laid out on the website. Plus, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with just about anybody on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. I'll have those links on your podcast profile too. Thank you so much again, and we'll talk soon.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
For now.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Craig B. Weldon and his work, please visit craigweldon.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.